Genshin Impact's 3.6 patch is going to be filled with some extremely great characters, and one of the most common questions I get is, who should I wish for? Nilou, Nahida, Baizhu, or Ganyu? While some people know exactly who they're going for, a lot of people are torn and undecided, and some are wondering if they should even wish at all. Especially since people are worried about whether Kazuha, Zhongli, or other characters they really want will get reruns soon after patch 3.6. That's why in this video we'll go over Nilou, Nahida, Baizhu, and Ganyu's strengths, weaknesses, team viability, and if they'll be worth it for you. After I break down each character, I'll talk about who is the best value for your Primo Gems and give a proven strategy that will help with future characters. Each of the limited 5 stars we'll be talking about in this list will receive a grade from bad to great in several categories including personal damage, support capability, team flexibility, and free-to-play friendliness. I'll also recommend characters that would make good teammates for these limited 5 stars, since you often need specific characters to really unlock the power of a limited 5 star. But as always, if you already know what character you really want, then wish for them. This is a guide to help clarify what the 3.6 limited 5 stars can and can't do, so that way you'll be prepared to solve any problems you might face when playing a certain character. With that said, let's begin the grading with the whirling water dancer Nilou. Nilou is a unique character and the only one to have the ability to change an elemental reaction. Nilou's core mechanic revolves around her passive ability to change Dendro cores produced from the Hydro and Dendro reaction into bountiful cores. Bountiful cores differ from normal bloom cores in that they explode really fast and do a lot more damage thanks to her second ascension passive that increases their damage based on her max HP. The downside is that you have to use Nilou with only Dendro or Hydro characters or all her potential is totally wasted. Nilou's ability to change the properties of the bloom reaction are really interesting, and she can be really good in AoE situations, but is very restricted on what teams and characters she can use and play with. And since bloom explosions also hurt you, and Nilou makes bloom explosions hit harder, you'll definitely be a lot more comfortable with some sort of Hydro or Dendro healer in your team when playing Nilou. So let's give this dancing dreamer some grades and talk about her value for your account. Nilou's personal damage is okay, but when you consider the bountiful core mechanic she brings, her damage becomes great. This puts her in a really unique situation because she ends up being a character like Sucrose where you don't even need to level her talents if you don't want to. Basically, all of the damage that Nilou will contribute is coming from reactions, not her skill or burst damage. So if you want to save on some Mora and Resin, you don't even need to level up her talents to get good damage numbers out of her. Nilou's support capability is bad. You play Nilou to play a team around her, but she is not meant to support other characters. She's the one who needs support because of her special bloom mechanic and all the special restrictions around it. Her team flexibility is bad. You cannot use any character that is not Hydro or Dendro with Nilou if you want to realize her potential. Her bountiful core bloom mechanic is what makes her unique, and while you can do fun things like vaporize her burst, she's not worth pulling just for that. Luckily, anyone can build one of these special bloom teams for Nilou because everyone has the free characters available to them in Dendro Traveler, Barbara, and Kale, even though Nilou has much better team options. So if you do go for Nilou, make sure you only play her with other Hydro and Dendro characters. Her free-to-play friendliness is good. Outside of her team composition restrictions, she's easy to build and just really wants a lot of HP, elemental mastery, and some energy recharge. It's really nice that you don't have to level her normal attacks, elemental skill, and elemental burst, since pretty much all of her damage is coming from her special bountiful cores and the bloom reaction. Nilou's teams, however, are very restrictive, so while she's very easy to build, you may be forced to use a budget team for Nilou if you don't have some of her more desired teammates like Nahida or Kokomi. As said before, Nilou is not a support, so go for her if you want to use her specific and special teams. Just know that you'll need to build a team around her, and that she often is not the one taking center stage. For Nilou teams, you can use basically any Hydro or Dendro character, but some of the best teammates include Nahida, Kokomi, Yelan, Yao Yao, Xingqiu, Dendro Traveler, and characters like Alhaitham, Baizhu, and Kaveh can work well with her too. Just stick to Hydro and Dendro only characters with at least one healer among them and you'll be good. Next, we move on to Nahida, the tiny Dendro deity and precious radish baby of absolute destruction. The Dendro Archon's main mechanic revolves around her elemental skill. It allows you to do a quick swipe or enter a camera-like state, spinning around and marking enemies. The marked enemies are tethered together, and when you trigger an elemental reaction, all enemies in the chain will trigger Nahida's Tri-Karma Purification, which deals a considerable amount of Dendro damage to each of them. The length of the tether and the range of the hold version of her skill are quite large, and this allows her to deal area of effect damage to enemies that are normally out of other characters' range. This is Nahida's main source of damage and what you want to focus on leveling up first. It can also be used to gather plants at a long range and even read the minds of some NPCs, which is neat, although the second part is kinda creepy. Nahida's elemental burst does no damage, but creates a beautiful domain expansion that gives bonus effects to her and the party. Her burst increases the damage of her skill when you have a pyro character in the party, allows her to trigger the skill more frequently when you have an electro character in the party, and increases the burst duration when you have a hydro character in the party. It also increases the elemental mastery of everyone in the party by 25% of the character whose elemental mastery is the highest in the whole team, which is usually Nahida. And speaking of elemental mastery, Nahida's skill also gets bonus damage and crit rate when she has more elemental mastery, and that talent scaling is much more heavily weighted towards EM, so you want to build her with lots of elemental mastery. So how does the tiny god of wisdom fare against the other characters? It's time to give the Cabbage Patch Archon a grading. Nahida's personal damage is great. Her normal attacks aren't super special, but she is a catalyst user that can apply lots of Dendro. However, her skill damage is really nice and quite insane for the sheer number of reactions and damage it can produce. What's also super nice is that she doesn't even need to be on the field to access this damage, and while her burst may not deal any damage itself, it does buff your team and Nahida's damage at the same time. Nahida's support capability is great. There isn't any team that uses Dendro characters that would not benefit from having Nahida. Her buffing and off-field capability combined with the great Dendro particle generation she has makes her a premier support for any team that appreciates Dendro reactions. Nahida is similar to Kazuha or Raiden in that she is classified as a team support and buffer by Hoyo, but she also does a fantastic amount of damage on her own. Nahida's team flexibility is great. You can use her on any team that wants a Dendro character and she will make it better. In fact, even in teams that already have a Dendro character, like Alhaitham teams, you also want to use Nahida because of the buffs, extra damage, and Dendro particle generation she provides. Nahida's free-to-play friendliness is great. She has a lot of good free-to-play weapon options, including the Magic Guide and Mappa Mare, but you can also use tech options like the Favonius Codex or Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers for certain situations. And since she also really appreciates having a lot of elemental mastery, if you have gacha weapons like the Sacrificial Fragments or Wandering Evenstar, those are really good options for her too. Nahida's great team flexibility and ability to make powerful Dendro teams with low investment makes her a really great option for just about everyone. She's been touted as one of the best characters in the game, and she's worth your primos if you don't have any other character you want more than her. That being said, she isn't a perfect character or a must pull, just a really great option that brings consistent damage, energy generation, and buffs to Dendro teams. Nahida has so many team options that it's hard to list them all, but just know that she can work with almost any Hydro, Electro, Pyro, or even Dendro characters. You can use her in super free-to-play friendly teams with Barbara, Lisa, and Dendro Traveler, or more advanced teams with Alhaitham, Yu'lon, and Kuki Shinobu. She also makes characters like Toma, who haven't seen as much use historically, really come alive in Burgeon teams. Nahida is, after all, support, but she also brings tons of damage to the table and is really flexible. And that means that anyone who has Nahida will be able to make a good team with her. Our next character on the list is someone people have been waiting literally years to wish for. It's Baizhu, the Dendro Doctor of Leeway and Chi-Chi's Guardian. So, how exactly does Baizhu work? Well, first of all, Baizhu is a healer. He has some shielding capabilities, but his shield is so small and weak that you shouldn't consider him a true shielder because he definitely wasn't designed to be one. Baizhu's normal attacks have him using a gentle fist style combo on enemies, but don't expect this to deal a lot of damage. His elemental skill sends out a spirit that coils and jumps around up to 3 enemies and heals your whole team. This heal ability is strong, but don't expect the damage to be anything special. Baizhu's burst is fairly interesting and probably the least straightforward part of his kit. It creates a quote-unquote shield that only lasts for a few seconds and can only absorb a paltry amount of damage. But even though the shield is so tiny and weak, it will refresh every few seconds and it heals you and deals a bit of dendro damage when it refreshes. This means that Baizhu's burst does not provide you with a true shield like Zhongli's or a weak shield that stacks up multiple times like Toma's, but a weak shield that just acts as a form of interruption resistance like Xingqiu's rain swords. This is because Baizhu's shield is meant to break or fade away so it can refresh in order to heal you and deal a little bit of dendro damage. Baizhu also has a unique passive that increases the on-field character's dendro reaction damage based on a portion of his max HP. Any on-field character will get this dendro reaction buff anytime Baizhu's burst heals them. And he has another fun passive that allows you to heal whenever you pick up a plant in the overworld. So how good is Baizhu overall? Baizhu's personal damage is bad. He is not meant to deal damage, he is meant to be a healer and give you some interruption resistance, while also increasing the dendro reaction damage of your on-field character. And you can definitely use Baizhu as a team driver in certain team compositions, but think of him as a strong healer that does weak damage. Baizhu's support capability is great. He is a great utility option and most healers make really good supports. The fact that he heals prevents you from being knocked around too much thanks to his burst and can increase your on-field character's dendro reaction damage is really nice. Baizhu is a great option for a team that is already doing good damage but needs that little extra bit of utility in the form of healing and interruption resistance. Baizhu's team flexibility is good. Surprisingly, you may not find too many teams you want to run Baizhu in, particularly if you already have Nahida. The healing Baizhu provides is universally useful, but with only 4 spots in a team, you may often find that you want to bring a character that provides more offensive benefits instead. However, if you have 3 strong characters that synergize well together and want an extra dendro utility character, then Baizhu is a great option. Baizhu's free-to-play friendliness is great. The prototype Amber, which is a craftable 4-star catalyst, is almost as good as his signature weapon. This, coupled with the fact that Baizhu can work in a variety of teams, makes him a great choice for free-to-play players. Just don't expect him to deal massive amounts of damage. Baizhu does well in a lot of teams, but particularly well with Sino. Sino really wants a dendro character to help him proc the quicken reaction, but not one that applies so much dendro that it eats into his ability to cause the aggravate reaction after quicken. He also really wants interruption resistance, and Baizhu provides all of this. Baizhu can also work in just about any team that wants a dendro character, just know that he can be pretty energy hungry, potentially needing over 250% energy recharge in certain teams. It's also worth noting that Baizhu will most likely be the last character you want to draft in the team and not the first, meaning that using him in a team will be a lower priority than other characters that have more offensive capabilities or buffs. Overall, Baizhu is a super comfy character, but not one I would recommend if you need more offensive-oriented support characters first. If you already have characters like Raiden, Nahida, or Kazuha, Baizhu is a great pickup. But there is one other really big consideration when wishing for Baizhu, and that is Yao Yao, a 4-star dendro healer that can basically do the same things he can. And in certain situations, for example Nilou Bloom teams, Yao Yao can perform even better than Baizhu can. So pull for Baizhu if you want a really comfy character, don't have Yao Yao, and have plenty of offensive characters already. Next, we move on to the final 5-star of patch 3.6, the other blue-clad, black-horned girl of the patch, Ganyu. The Coco Goat was once one of the best and most OP characters in the game, but does she stand the test of time? Let's go over her kit and find out. Ganyu's kit revolves around two major elements, her special bow charge shot and her elemental burst. Ganyu's aim shots can have a second level charge that allows them to hit twice. The first hit will deal considerable damage, and the second hit will deal even more damage and have an AoE. Ganyu's aim shots can deal 30 to 40,000 damage unbuffed and over 100,000 damage under buffs when she is causing a melt reaction. Ganyu's skill produces an ice lotus that taunts enemies and stays on the field for several seconds. It produces particles when it spawns and when it explodes. This isn't that impactful to her kit, but it is useful and worth leveling up, albeit after you level her burst and normal attacks. Ganyu's burst summons a large ring that drops over 30 big icicles that each have some AoE, meaning that the AoE damage potential of this ability is massive if you can stack enemies together so that each icicle can trigger multiple AoEs on enemies. Ganyu also has a passive that buffs the cryo damage of characters standing in her elemental burst. And because you can use the Blizzard Strayer set on her to massively increase her crit rate, you can build tons of crit damage and attack to make her hit even harder. So does the Coco Goat truly retain her GOAT status after all this time? Well, her personal damage is great. Her aim shots do enormous damage, especially on melt teams, even if those are more annoying and unwieldy to play. And her burst also has great AoE and damage capabilities. Ganyu's support capability is okay to good. She is not like a typical hyper carry that has no support capability. Her burst lingers when you switch out, giving her off-field presence, AoE damage, and also a passive that buffs cryo damage for characters inside its fairly large radius. And while her skill does taunt enemies, taunts are not as useful in Genshin as they are in other games. Those support capabilities can be quite helpful in something like a Morgana freeze team, but in other situations, they aren't as useful. Ganyu's team flexibility is good. There's two main teams that you can play Ganyu in, either freeze or melt. Freeze teams rely more on Ganyu's burst, whereas melt teams rely more on Ganyu's aimed charge shots. However, these special aim shots make her great for the overworld or boss fights because they have infinite range, meaning she becomes really nice for fighting certain enemies you'd rather keep at a distance. And since her burst can work off-field, she can also be a good option for something like Reverse Melt or bring more AoE to Dendro teams when you don't have another good option available. And while she can work in a lot of different teams, just know that very few of them are top tier. Ganyu's free-to-play friendliness is good. You can craft the prototype crescent for free, and it just so happens to be one of the best weapons she can use. And as long as you don't mind using the bow aim shots, she's great in the overworld, on bosses, and in co-op. Just be aware that she does really appreciate having a shielder like Zhongli for this playstyle. And while her team options are not as varied as characters like Nahida, she can perform well in a variety of teams thanks to the off-field damage capabilities of her burst, in addition to the on-field damage capabilities of her special charged shots. Overall, Ganyu is a very solid pick, but unfortunately doesn't feel great on mobile and has fallen a bit out of favor thanks to the introduction of Dendro characters who now occupy some of the best teams in the game. But if you wanted the Coco Goat for a long time, she'll definitely serve you well. Just be mindful of enemy attacks when you're in her aiming mode. For Ganyu's teams, Zhongli, Bennett, and Xiangling are great for melt, while Animo characters, Mona, Kokomi, and other cryo characters pair great with her for freeze teams. You can also use her as an option in Dendro teams that use Hydro, as Cryo does not interact with Dendro, allowing you to still trigger reactions like Hyperbloom and Burgeon, in addition to Superconduct and Melt. That's an overview of each of the limited 5-star characters' strengths, weaknesses, and teams in patch 3.6, and if you aren't sure who to wish on in patch 3.6, then go for Nahida. She's one of the best characters in the game and is a major help for so many different teams. She's also extremely free-to-play friendly, and unlike characters like Raiden, even if you're brand new, you can get to Sumeru at very low adventure rank to build her up. But if you don't particularly enjoy her, then don't feel forced to pull for her. After all, you want characters that you actually really appreciate, not ones that you feel forced to wish for. And if you want Nahida and another character in patch 3.6, then I have something you may want to consider. I suspect that Nahida will get a rerun before most of these characters. Now this is totally speculation, but I think they might rerun the Archons in the 4.0 update, similar to how they reran them in 3.0. That is, they reran one Archon each patch update, Zhongli in 3.0, Venti in 3.1, then Nahida was released in patch 3.2, and finally Raiden had her rerun in patch 3.3. I could see them doing the same thing with the Archons again in patch 4.0, but it would be likely that Nahida would be the last one since there will now be 5 Archons, putting the next rerun for the Dendro baby at roughly patch 4.4. But again, this is totally speculation. I have no idea if this will happen, it's just a weird thing my brain came up with that seems like it might be a pattern. And I have another big tip and nugget of wishing wisdom for you. If you're considering going for Baizhu or Ganyu in the second half of patch 3.6 but aren't totally committed to either one of them, make sure not to wish immediately. Wait for the patch 3.7 livestream that will happen about 10 days into the Baizhu and Ganyu banners. This preview for the 3.7 patch will reveal the upcoming characters, which means you'll know if your long-awaited characters, like Kazuha, are getting reruns in patch 3.7, and you can decide to go for them instead of going for Baizhu or Ganyu. And while patch 3.6 will have some of the best 5 stars we've had in a long time, there are still some characters that are even better. If you'd like to know which characters those are and which ones you should go for, I'll have that video and another helpful one for you on screen at the end of this one. If you do wish in patch 3.6, I hope you get the 5 stars you want. I hope you win your 50/50s and they come home early. Remember everyone, I love you, stay jawsome, may order guide you friends, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.